Hi students, let's continue with the data dependency. One of the conditions of the parallelism, the three conditions of the parallelism, so the data dependency, control dependency and the resource dependency. So we are discussing about the data dependency. In the previous video, I explained about the 5 different types of data dependency. So now I'm going to apply that 5 dependencies in this. Means I'm going to check whether these 4 instructions, here I am taking the 4 instructions, these 4 instructions are following what type of dependency. Okay, so let's try to identify what's happening here. So in this first equation, what it is doing, means what is the meaning of the first equation. So here the R1, we are trying to load the value of the memory of A, means in the memory of A location, means some data is there, so that we are moving to the R1 register. And the second statement, what it is performing. So the content of R1 and the content of R2 are adding, and the result will be storing in R2. Okay, and the next is the content of R3 is moving to the R1 register. And the fourth segment, the statement is saying that, so the content of R1 we are storing in the memory location B. So this is what the statement's meaning is. Now try to identify what type of dependencies are there. So the first type, what is this? For flow dependency. Now let's check whether the flow dependency is existing in these statements or not. Flow dependency. So identify the flow dependency. If you clearly observe here, the flow dependencies is there. S2 is flow dependent on S1, right or wrong? Here, this is an R1 and this is an R1, right? So, the first one is S2 is flow dependent on S1. S1 is determining S2. So, S2 is flow dependent on S1. So, one statement. So, let's check still some more instructions whether the flow dependent is there in the remaining instructions or not. And S4 is flow dependent on S3, right or wrong? S4 is a flow dependent on S3. So here R1 is there and here this is the R1. So we are moving the result of R3 to the R1. So after this statement is over, then only we have to execute the fourth statement. So the sequence should be there. It is a flow dependent. So S4 is the flow dependent on S3. Because after executing S3 and you have to the flow S3 after S4. So let's check still some more is any flow dependency is there or not. And S2 is flow dependent on S2. S2 is flow dependent on S2. Why it is flow dependent on S2? Because we are trying to add the content of R1 and R2 and the result is storing in R2 only. So this R2 is having the separate result and this R2 is having the, after performing the operation, R2 is going to be updated. So obviously S2 is flow dependent on S2 itself. So there are 3 dependencies here there, the flow dependency, the 3 instructions. And coming to the next type of dependency, what is the second one? The second one, let's check anti-dependency is there in these instructions or not. Anti-dependency. So identifying the anti-dependency. So here the anti-dependency, if you clearly observe from S2 to S3. S2 to S3, there is an anti-dependency. Okay, S2 to S3. Anti-dependency is there. Let's check. What is S2? Add R2 comma R1. So the result will be storing in R2. And here we are trying to move R3 value to the R1. Suppose here we are trying to move the, after executing this operation, we are trying to update the R1 value. Suppose before executing S2, we are trying to move the R1 value and this is anti-dependent on S2. So that's why S2 is anti-dependent on S3. Okay. So now let's check the next dependency. The next dependency is output dependency. So in this instructions, the output dependency is, I think S1 is output dependent on S3. S1 is output dependent on S3 because the content of A will be loading to R1 register and the content of R3 is loading to R1 register. So both are, here we are getting a different values for the output. So here we are getting a different A value and here we are getting the R3 value. So this two are the output dependencies, S1 and S3. And what about the next one? The next one is the fourth one is the identifying output dependency, and we had seen the anti-dependency. So here S3 is anti-dependent on S2 because between the content of R1 is input to S2 and R2 is used as an output to the S3. So that's why this is an anti-dependency and this is an output dependency. So still check anything dependencies are there. So I think this is the flow dependency, anti-dependency, output dependency is there. Input output dependency is not there. So now let's try to work on the dependency graph. Dependency graph. So represent all these data dependency in the form of a dependency graph. How you are going to represent it? So what are the four instructions? Let's take the four instructions. S1, S2, S3, S4. So these are the four instructions. So what are the dependencies are there? S1 is flow dependent on S2. S1 is flow dependent on S2. S3 is flow dependent on S4. So S3 is flow dependent on S4. S2 is flow dependent on S2. So loop. So first one is over. Now let's check with the second one, anti-dependency. S2 is anti-dependent on S3. S2 is anti-dependent on S3. Now coming to the output dependency. S1 is output dependence on S3. So this is how you have to represent the instructions in the dependency graph. So in the exams, if they are asked us to write the dependency graph, means by seeing the instructions, first you need to identify what are the dependencies relations are there in the instructions. So try to identify the 5 types of data dependencies and represent that in the form of a dependency graph. So I hope you understand how to write the dependency graph. Thank you.